All right, guys. Thanks for everybody joining us today on the Defender user group. Once again, just want to go through and knock out a couple of things before we introduce our speaker today. So one of those is the Chatham House rules do apply. So when in a meeting or part thereof, under the Chatham House rules, you're free to use the information received, but neither identify nor of the affiliation of the speaker, nor that of the participants may be revealed. If you are not a member yet of our Defender user group, please go on and take this opportunity to use the QR code on the screen to get added. We do want this to be a community group where you guys can share information of what's happening in your environments, what you've learned, what you've done, things that might help others. This is something that is sponsored by Ontinu, but it's more for the people that's out in the security field that's actually dealing with the day-to-day in the trenches. So we want this to be for everybody that's on the call, or those that are even maybe not on this call, but may want to join the community itself. Kind of an introduction to the group, kind of already did that, but this is going to be more of real world experiences based on Microsoft security itself. We don't focus too much on other security products. There may be some mentions of those throughout different sessions over time, but the goal is really to focus on Microsoft security, how to utilize the most effective ways to deploy and maintain your environment using Microsoft security. But then also taking and looking at not only your endpoints, but identities and then the information thereof. So there could be sessions around purview and things like that at a later point in time. If you need to contact us for any reason, this is our contact email. So this is directly to Wafa, who actually helps manage this group as well. She's on the screen. If you do have questions or topics that you would like to bring up, maybe that you don't mention in this call today, please let us know. We're happy to take and try to get those facilitated so you can bring those to light. One of the last things that we actually have before we get to our speaker is we have started a podcast called Defend Your Time. We have actually started talking about Microsoft licensing. If anybody knows anything about Microsoft licensing, it's very confusing as to what's actually in each license set, making sure that you have what's actually there, and then going through and helping you guys understand different parts of security. So we will try to release these a little bit more on a regular basis, but this is a podcast that we're posting. So if you have problems being able to watch a video, or you have problems being able to do other things while at work, but you want some audio to listen to just to try to help you through your day and maybe get some tidbits of information, we're going to try to start presenting these to you guys. Now, for our speaker, the guest speaker today is Samik Roy. Samik Roy is a good friend of mine. I have to say he is one of the brightest, most intelligent guys that I actually know. He's not only an author, but he's also one of the very few security MVPs in India. And the man really and truly does know his security background. Samik and I were former colleagues for a long time. We've worked around each other, know him very well, nothing but respect. And I'll turn it over to you now, Samik, to present your topic for the day.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Dan and Wafa, for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. And really a big thank you to all of you for joining and taking out your time to attend the session. So hope I can make really create some value out of your time. With that said, I will quickly share my screen, and if anyone could give a thumbs up that you see the screen.
You're good to go.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, right, I mean, as Dan mentioned, I'll not go about my introduction. Maybe we'll keep that to the end. But what we're going to talk about today is harnessing the power of Microsoft Defender Advanced Hunting. So when you talk about advanced hunting, if you look at the term itself, Microsoft itself has told us that it is advanced, right? So that means Defender is being a very deep product across various platforms, either it be identity, either it be endpoint, or it is like cloud apps and other things, right? Uh, the portal is good enough to troubleshoot, understand the entire security landscape, starting from reporting, understanding what's missing, how you onboard things. That's how it is. But there are things when you use a platform, right? When you use Microsoft Security Platform and when you get all the data sets behind that. So that's really one of the greatest flexibility Microsoft provides than any other products in the market, that it not only tells you that you use the product, we get you alerts, we protect you, and that's it. It also says you that we are collecting a huge amount of telemetry data behind the scenes, and it gives access to the customer, right, that they can go and leverage the data. And that's why we call advanced hunting, and then that makes sense that we do a proactive threat hunting. So that it's by definition a product, and there are standard rules to deploy the product and to manage the product, but it's also flexible in a way how you can tailor it to your organization's needs. So that would be the idea, to understand how we get started with the advanced threat hunting and how we use it to our advantage, right? So let me just move on to the next, and this QR code is to my LinkedIn profile. I'll be sharing at the end again if you want to connect. Now, looking at the agenda today, we're going to have introduction, which I already spoke a bit about. I'm going to talk a bit more about where exactly, in the workflow, this advanced hunting comes into play. Then we understand a little bit of threat hunting, what it is in generic terms. Like it is not a very complex topic. It is just more of a habit building stuff here for threat hunting. Then we're going to talk about the benefits, obviously, because if you're doing something, there has to be some benefit to do that, and we should be, making our life easier with that benefits. Then after benefits, because we're talking about threat hunting, right? And end of the day, threat hunting is nothing but a query which is built based on a Kusto query language, right? We're going to see how step by step we can craft our query. And the reason I say craft, because each one of us are unique, and our thought process to understand an attack, to see an attack, is different. And that's why you craft query. We don't just copy paste, or we don't write some script or things like that. A same query can be written in different ways depending on how you think about the attack and what's your understanding of the attack or the detection what you're trying to do. Then the next one is, once we have the query, obviously that query is going to give some results. How we can interpret that results in a way that makes sense. To give an example, we see a device, we see the device offline, right? Then we just try to run a query, see how long you have been, the device have been offline and online. Maybe we can, so if we write a simple query to see, that how many times it has been checked in as offline online, but the same result we can interpret in a way that when that device was last online. All right, so that's about interpreting. That's a simple example. With the threat landscape that goes more complex, and with again practice, it becomes more easier to interpret, right? Then the best practices, right? Maybe one of the best practices which I always talk about, if we do something depending or driven by a hypothesis, that means we have a outcome in mind, what we are expecting the query to give us. It's a lot easier. We get a yes or no answer, and that helps us to decide that, rather than just writing a query out of the blue and then having a results and not knowing what to do with that. And then obviously it's at the end, but I think anytime you have any question, feel free to paste in the chat. And also I'm going to share Microsoft documentation where you can start your learning journey of advanced hunting, right? So that said, when you talk about introduction, right, as I mentioned, when you talk about advanced hunting, we need to understand where exactly advanced hunting plays a role. So imagine that we are having a organization where they got Defender from Microsoft, and they started deploying, like, based on their ease, right, or their project plan, that we go Defender for Office first, then maybe we go for cloud apps, we go for then Defender for endpoint, then we go for Defender for identity. And that's the onboarding piece of it. And that also depends, right, like depending on the size of the organization, it takes maybe from weeks to months, it varies, but that's what the onboarding is called. Then, and as you can see, right, even onboarding is like deploying of defenders, applying policies. That's what the onboarding is. Then once we do onboarding, right, by default or by design, what Defender does, it starts to collect really verbose level of data. And I'm going to show that as a part of demo that what are the telemetry level of data Microsoft collects. Obviously, Defender engine, uses that data to build their machine learning based alerts and detection, but that is also available to us as a customer that we can go ahead and then read the data and make sense the way we want to. Then once the data collection happen, obviously the third part is we onboard it, we let the data collection start, then Defender gets an action. So when you say Defender gets an action, right, what actually it is, Defender starts to generate alert. So let's say you have, for example, in a mid-sized organization, week one, you have onboarded 20, 30, 40 devices, or maybe like your 1,000 users, and then start data collecting. Maybe for a week it will do so, but even it does less than that, and it starts generating alert, right, that you have seen a malware in an endpoint maybe, or there is a policy violation if you have deployed Defender for Office to 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 anti-spam, anti-phishing policies and things like that. So that's why the phase is where you call it Defender in action. So once Defender in action, obviously it's a generic product designed by Microsoft, right? So you cannot expect it to work it very fine tuned to at day one. So it's going to create alert and things like that and block threats on its own. And then we have a chance to dive into advanced hunting. Now, why this is exactly, advanced hunting is based in this space, as you understand, we have to give some space to Defender so that it can be onboarded, it can collect data, it can start generating alert. So then when you have advanced hunting stage, right, by that time you'll be having something like you have raw data, you don't know really how to grade it, and you don't have a reference to with how do you search it. Then once you have some alerts, let's say, you have Defender for Identity alert, maybe honeypot or something like that, or maybe brute force, or Defender for Office policy violation, Defender for endpoint, malware blocked, or let's say if you have deployed any attack surface reduction rules to your Windows 10 devices or any other devices, they start creating alerts. Now, with respect to an alert, you also have the raw data. Now it becomes easy for you. You have a problem. Now you have an alert, you got to figure out that alert or incident is really a true positive or a false positive. Well, Defender screen gives you a lot of information to decide that. But if you really want to go dig deeper, that's where you connect your alerts with raw data. And how you do it? So if you take any example of that alert, right, let's say, as I said, anti-malware and things like that. So we have a hypothesis, this is a possible malware, right? And then we attach MITRE to it. What happens there?
Samik, you just got muted, bud. I don't know how.
I think, yeah, maybe. No worries. So then what happens is, once you start correlating things, right, it becomes easier. Now, if you have a malware, you can see that, okay, this malware detected. Now you can have multiple questions. Is that malware is available in other devices? For example, that can be a query or that can be a hypothesis you're trying to solve. Then what you do, you got to see that, you know Defender will provide the hash of the malware, right? For example, you're going to take that hash and go to device events table or device file creation tables, right? And then do a random query with that hash that any other devices is this hash chain, because obviously a malware can keep changing name as and when it travels to devices, but it's technically impossible to change the hash because that's the crux of the file. So that's where it's correlated between your advanced hunting, having an alert and with raw data, right? And that's where advanced hunting is kind of in here, right? And as I say, once you have done your advanced hunting, and with practice gets better. There's no formula, right? You follow ABC steps and it's gets solved. Every advanced hunting or every hypothesis will have its own course of action and course of time. And then once it is done, we're gonna kind of relate that back to an alert to get started and go from there. So that's where advanced hunting is basically used in the middle of the Defender workflow, right? Now, if we try to go further, right, to understand what a threat hunting is, because threat hunting is mostly what we're going to do when we use advanced hunting. So Let's imagine we have a hypothesis. Now, this hypothesis can be driven by different factors. So you have an alert, malware alert. You have a hypothesis. Okay, malware alert is there. I need to see if other devices are having the malware or not. That's one of the hypotheses. Now you also have joined a team, right? And you come from a diversified security background, you see all working fine, there is no much of alert, but you still have a mindset that, okay, yesterday I saw this malware was identified and flagged out publicly, right? And those public has, or let's say, take an example of Tor IP addresses. You want to do a manual check that, let me see if there is any Tor interaction happening in, in the Defender environment. That's a hypothesis driven by human intention, right? So there are different aspects how a hypothesis can be formulated, but hypothesis is nothing but a concept which you are trying to prove. You have a suspicion that's really not real. You are going to think about it, and then when you think about it, you have to follow certain steps. And while you follow certain steps, you have Defender Advanced Hunting to back you up to provide and decide your hypothesis true or false. So if you look at the next stage, right? All you're going to do is any hypothesis. The first step to begin to prove an hypothesis is conduct a search. Now, KQL has a very strong keyword called search. So you can issue a search in tables if you have no idea, or if you don't know where the data set can be, right? As an example of Tor IP address. So you can actually, get to the thing that do a search and then give IP addresses. That's going to define all the tables wherever this IP address is possibly seen. Now, let's say there is another scenario. You know, ABC EXE, right? That's a bad EXE which is flagged out. You got to know by some news and things like that, and that's if that's a hypothesis. You want to see if that's there in an environment or not. In that case, you can do the same search, but this time we can scope it to a particular table or a group of table. Now the search is more tailored, right? But either way, you're gonna conduct a search first. Then once we conduct a search, right, either, as I say, right, either it's going to be a yes or no, either it's going to give a results or it's not going to give a result. We search for Tor IP address. Let's say it's there or it's not there. Let's say it's there, right? So what you're going to do is we pivot. And how we pivot? First we do a search saying that, okay, this is my Tor IP addresses, let me list down the table where it is seen. Then we're going to expand in each table, right? Because the kind of information you're going to get in device info or maybe device process event, you will get a different kind of information in device network event. And eventually, once you expand them, you have a bigger picture, or you can join them back again to understand a better picture, to understand the real threat, right? Or the real threat vector from where exactly it is originated and who was the person who used the Tor IP addresses. And after that, what are the processes being created maybe in the device and things like that. Then coming back to the previous one, right? Once you have an hypothesis, there can be multiple, multiple aspects and hypothesis can be developed. Either you have an incident and then you're trying to prove, or you're trying to find out that incident is a true positive or a false positive. Then you have a hypothesis, and then when you issue a search and investigate it, if it is proven right, then you know you go back to the incident response and then write it back or update the incident comment and things like that. So that's incident driven hypothesis. Now you have something on your assumption, or maybe you have been following some really security articles and things like that, you have figured out based on that. Then that rule or that particular hypothesis is not yet defined in the system. We're going to develop a new detection event which we can do it in Defender, right? He got muted, but it's all right. Uh, Coming to the point that either you do it based on an incident or alert, you're gonna write it back to a incident or response if your hypothesis is proven right, and then if something, I think something is missing, I got muted, but all right, no problem. So other than that,
Got muted again, Samik. I'm not sure what's going on with the
uh,
muting here.
yeah, I think I got muted a couple of times, but that's all right. I think good that I see a notification. Okay, so think
Skip. Yeah.
okay.
Hold on. It looks like everybody's getting muted. Let's see if we can figure out what's going on here.
All right, I think it's good now.
Yeah, keep going.
All right. Yeah, so just to conclude and summarize this piece, right, that either it's in the system, you're going to say it's a true positive or false positive, or it is like if it is a human intention driven, right, or suspicion driven, you're going to develop a new content or due detection based on that hypothesis being proven right. Now, to get deeper,
Hey, Samik, before you move forward, there's a question in the chat and everything
yes,
from Doug. There's also a question from uh, someone else asking if there anyone has any good repositories or libraries that's useful
I,
for KQL queries. I know a couple of people like Joshua and them posted some that they
yeah,
use. Do you have any that you
I think
recommend as well?
I will go with KQL search because with the recent version, they have also done some sort of AI stuff where you kind of write a manual search in the query and that somehow builds that query. So yeah, KQL search is one good of them. And let me also show you in the screen, apart from repository, if you're using Defender, right? Defender itself has a lot of query given by Microsoft to be used. So
Yep. So the other question is from Doug Fisher. Is there any plans to include the file path outside of the device TVM software evidence beta table, or any methods to see the install folder or parent program when it's a component?
So I would go on the or part because the first pass is different, definitely a Microsoft feature release, which I cannot be able to comment on. But coming to the next thing, how do you see it? One of the places what we could do is device process events. That might be something which will be helpful, where you can correlate and things like that, and that can give the parent folder from where it came in or device filing. Joining these two can be helpful to find out the devices and the vulnerability stuff from a parent folder perspective. And even other than advanced hunting, if you go to device page for a particular device in Defender, you're going to see the process list, right? So by clicking on them also, you can see the history and the parent folder to some extent there as well. So there are two places which you can leverage. Hope that
Awesome.
answers. All right, so going to the next piece, right? So understanding threat hunting. So now we talked about, right, that it has to be hypothesis driven, and hypothesis can be based on an incident or alert, or it can be human intention or suspicion driven. Uh, Now, what are the traits, like how do you define a threat hunting and what kind of behavior you should adopt to be a threat hunter? So first of all, you have to be proactive, as I mentioned, right? It's not always that one incident comes in and then you go and define a hypothesis and then write it back or do some investigation. You should always keep an eye like what's going on, any threat. For example, right, when log4j came in, that was like everywhere, right? And there are so much resources available to understand that. I mean, Defender as a platform always updates any new recent threats coming in, but it's also is a good idea as a threat hunter to keep looking on a couple of like for example, I think Defender for TI also have certain threat releases to look at things and things like that. So just be proactive looking at what you are looking for and what is the threat landscape going to. Then obviously, once you have the curiosity grown, you're gonna hypothesis driven approach, and the hypothesis can be anything, right? So because attackers might use something which you have never thought of. So it's not traditional thinking. So your hypothesis can be anything. Can my system, if my system getting rebooted 10 times a day, that is a suspicion. Yes, it can be one, right? If my system is generating like 10 times more log than I'm expecting or more than average, is that a suspicion? Yes, that can be. So these are some examples, but what I have seen to when an attack is getting like initiated, right? And obviously, if you have, let me just paste the MITRE org. I would request if you could have a look at it. Keep this website handy, which I'm pasting in the chat. That will help you to exactly identify any behavior you see, right? Which place in the kill chain you are in, right? And then it will help you to traverse back and forward on your hypothesis to define that it's a real attack or not. Now, the next thing is obviously if it is there is evidence, that's where you get hypothesis correct. If there's no evidence, that's not, that's just a thought process, right? Now, every hypothesis we do, right, either it is based out of an alert or it's based out of our curiosity, right? It is possibly, if it is found as that there is some evidence, it is actually pointed to a threat. Now, what are the benefits when I do it? The good part with Defender, I think most of the Defender tables always have real-time data. For example, if we talk about Defender, device info, right? Almost every 15 minutes, every device checks in that they are live or not. Device process event, device file events, they almost attract or capture real-time data. So you almost have access to your real-time data analysis, which can give you not only threat landscape, even if you want to understand, right? uh, what is the entire data structure behind the Defender, how it calculates, how Defender algorithm works, right? That also can be a good thing to understand from real-time data ingestion. And next thing is obviously custom queries, as I mentioned in the very beginning, right? So there's a difference between writing a script and crafting a query. So writing a script, like you say, let's say you want to invoke something in PowerShell, you say invoke hyphen REST API, and then you give the URL, and that's how it is. And that's going to be pretty much common for every REST API you want to invoke, for example, in PowerShell, which is scripting. But coming to a query, you can define, right? After, so the best practice says that whenever you write a query, you define the data source. That can be one or more than one table. The immediate thing you should do is put a time filter, right? Now there are different ways how you can put a time filter. Let's say you can, I'm going to again show this in demo. So it's again crafting how your understanding is, and what kind of hypothesis you are behind. So let's say you're doing a generic thing, right? You just can randomly say that go ahead and look back the data for whole 1 day or 7 days. Now, same thing. You see a different pattern that users are really getting, 100% CPU usage or really getting high volume logs during the evening time. You can actually run the query on every evening time, right? Give me the query from yesterday 5 to 6 p.m. So these are the things where crafting query makes sense, and that's where intuition and your understanding of the environment and threat landscape makes sense. Now, another thing I would say, because Defender is a collective data source now, and it's cloud connected. So if you have 1,000 devices, if you have like more than that, 10,000 devices, right? All those devices data are going to be in the same data source. And also they are in different tables. One is for process event, one is for, let's say one is for network event, one is for network info. Even there is a log for certificate installation in device captured by Defender. So, and that is captured for every endpoint wherever Defender is installed, or Defender is, which is onboarded Defender. Coming to Defender for identity, right? So you have identity logon event, directory events, and things like that. Coming to, Defender for Office, you have technically the email event, email attachment event, and things like that. So it gives you cross endpoint. So that can be a user, that can be a physical machine itself, where you can correlate behavior around multiple devices. So let's say if we want to see that, what is the average data volume generation, right? So how many processes each devices creates on an average on an hourly basis. You can really do that using advanced hunting. And once you see that spike in, let's say, one or two devices, right, that can be suspicious. The next thing is obviously, as I say, right, Defender captures various aspect of an endpoint. If we consider endpoint as an example here, it captures logon event, it captures process event, it captures network info, and things like that. So the data correlation between the tables, it's really easier here. And each of the tables, though they don't hold a total common key, for example, you don't get device name in all the logs, but you might get cross correlation columns. So let's say device info have device name and device ID. The device ID can be used, or device ID can be found also in other tables like device network events and things like that. So that's how we correlate two tables to identify or to check something specific for one particular endpoint, right? Coming back to, as I have been iteratively saying, that crafting a query, right? If we, before we type a query of what we should understand, right? So coming to this fundamental thing, we do a search. Now that search can be like a wildcard search. You do a search and then you search an IP address and look at all the tables, or you know that you know a portion of a device name, or you know a IP address of a device name or a device. Then you're going to go to device logon events and then search for that IP address, figure out the name of that from device info, and then query further tables and do the search for further tables for process events and networks and events and things like that. Then this is the most important part, because when as a threat hunter, right, uh, we try to query any table. Obviously defender collects huge volume of data in terms of columns, right? If you do a random search, or if you want to see, let's say, give me all the columns from device info, you possibly get like 20, 30, 40 columns, and then that might distract your advanced hunting, that might distract your hypothesis understanding, and there are a lot of things, which come as a GUI and confuse you in the threat hunting. So it's always ideal that once you do or query any table, try to project it. Projection gives you a focus. Let's say I'm just querying device info table. So maybe I will take device name, device logon event, is it successfully logged on or not, and things like that. So these three may be meaningful column for me. Defender might use a lot of other columns. There are other hypotheses where I need other columns, but if I'm working on a particular hypothesis and that need only 3 to 4 columns, we should stick to that. That helps us in two-way. Number one, reduces the distraction. Number two, you know, if you write a short query, the query volume is lesser, the query is faster. So your efficiency also goes higher. Then Defender technically stores the data in a JSON format wherever there are, let's say, complex table, if it is having a JSON, string, or if it has a particular, how do I say this, a particular notation, like let's say if it is storing a column as flag column, if you have logged in, flag is 0, if you have not logged in, flag is 1, right? Now those kind of things, when you query and when you see it as an output, it might be confusing, right? Because if you are in a flow and you want to see log on, log off, and that's how your mind or eye is set to see, if you see zeros and ones, it will be confusing to build your hypothesis. So ideally we do extend. Whenever there's a JSON, we can break the JSON using extension. And what we could also do is, if there are certain flags, that is, let's say, 0 and 1s, right? If we want to convert it to a particular data type we want to see, let's say it is a successful login or a failed login, that's where we extend. So extend is more of like the runtime modification of your schema. It doesn't actually change the data source, but technically it changes the way you see the data source, the immediate response, right? And that makes it more readable. Once we extend it, again, coming back to the volume of data, as Defender gives you like huge amount of data, right? So I'm gonna again write some query and show it to you. If we just write a query, give me all the device events, right? Project column ABC, extend 1, 2, 3, and things like that. Let's say we get 10,000 rows. So as a threat hunter, it's technically impossible to go through 10,000 rows and do some understanding. Like, you'll definitely not get an understanding. It's just that data dump to you. That's where we need to have perspectives. So coming to device logon events, right? So let's take, we take a perspective here that we want to see how many are success, or we want to see how many are failures logins, or we want to see that how many success, how many failures on every hour for each device. That's where call a perspective. We are looking the data from a particular angle to understand what we are looking for. That's where we summarize. So summarize gives us flexibility, or gives an aspect, or I would say gives an angle to look at the data. Then, if possible, visual is always 1,000 times better than a data point. And the Defender Advanced Hunting really supports a good amount of visual coming from bar chart, pie chart, and other charts, right? Where you can render stuff in a visual way. And I'm planning to have this demo, just after maybe this slide or a few more slides, so that I can show you how you can craft your query from very basics. Now, this is another example, right, where you just simply run a query, and then what I have done is, like, I'm looking at device events where the action types start with ASR. That means I'm looking at and trying to filter all those events which are attached to ASR rules. Maybe it's a block event or it's an audit event, doesn't matter, but I'm just taking that. So this is where this can be an example of good search, right? So I'm just trying to search something. Search doesn't mean that you have to write the literal keyword search, but you are technically searching a particular incident, particular IP address, or even particular element in your tables. Once you do that, right, how you interpret, as I was talking about, right, this query, as you see, when I click on it, it is inspecting the record on the right hand side. We should be able to see that in the demo as well, that what is interpreting to, that we have written a query. That query is showing some data from this demo PC2, right? And also it is interpreting that it has a risk level of medium, it has an exposure level of medium, right? And then what is the process tree of that particular device with respect to that particular filter, right? That's the interpretation. So we ran a query, right? Okay, I have a question. I'll just take this slide and then answer the question. Really good one. So coming back to the point that you do a search, search gives you a result. Now it all depends how you look at the data. So it's like the 6-9 incident, right? Both the things are correct. So that's where how you interpret the result. It makes sense, and this comes with more and more threat hunting you do, right? Obviously, the next one is best practices. As I have been, I think, iterated multiple times, that ideal way and possibly the arguably the most, effective way is hypothesis driven. Because if you start writing query without an intention, you're going to end up with only confusion. Then once you write a query, right, we have to understand that one query written for today, right, that's not going to stand true for next 5 years. So let's say today we are trying to find out that someone is trying to log on to a device, and he has failed for 5 times from a particular IP address, and then he is successful for that IP address in the sixth time within 10 minutes. So that's the brute force, right? Now today, with the tool set we have, we can assume that this incident for an attacker, it might take 10 minutes, but eventually the tool sets will, advance, attackers will go further above and beyond. So tomorrow, when we run the same query, the logic might remain same, 5 failed and 1 successful, but the time frame might reduce. That attackers might find out some tool, or they might be able to write some efficient script, which is able to do the same thing within a minute, right? So in that case, the query has to get updated every time you look for it, right? So always look for continuous improvement. The third one is collaborating. So as in SOC, right? Ideally, we'll be very rare case will be working alone as a threat hunter. It's most possibly a team will be working with. And Defender has a really good feature wherein you have written a query, you have, let's say, done 50% of a hypothesis. You can share that to from that point in time to your peer, right? And then he can take it up from there. And also any insights you're finding, you can share all those things with your peer. And that's how the collaborative threat hunting makes more sense, because the other person might come from a different background and they have different aspects of thought process. And then I think most important is document. And when I say document, it need not to be like a big Word document or a traditional document. It can be as simple as that, just commenting out the query to make it more readable. And anytime you even visit it after 6 months, you see it, you can make sense out of it, right? So these are, I would say, fundamentally kind of the best practices we have. And now, as you see, demo time. Let me pull up the demo screen here. I hope the screen is visible now. All right. Uh, Coming to this section, right? So even if you have not got access to, fundamentally all we do is type in security.microsoft.com, and that takes us to the Microsoft security portal. And obviously, if you are having multiple customers, you can, as a shortcut, you can change the tenant ID. It will switch to that tenant. Now, in the left navigation, how we get here, you need to have permission, obviously, and also the right licensing to see this option. And just so that you are aware, this advanced hunting query, whatever you're going to write, if you look at the max data set, I'm excluding the custom range, the max data set is 90 days here. The reason is this data is stored up to 30 days by Microsoft. If you want to have better retention, you have to, you know, put the data somewhere like in a same, maybe Sentinel or any other storage account, Event Hub, anywhere else. But this 30 days is something which it keeps. So that means data ingested today, you can do or apply advanced hunting to next 30 days for the same data. Now, once you go to custom, advanced hunting, let me try to, create a new query. If I create a new query, you see there are two options which Microsoft has given us: query and editor, which we are right in here. Now, anybody who is kind of new to this environment, they are trying to learn, right? There is a really nice query builder for that. So if I click on the query builder, now if you see, there are literally examples made, and you can, select from drag and drop, and the query is built. You can add more and things like that. And then let me load sample queries, remove public IPs, right? Once I load it, you see, this is more of a interactive interface. You don't need to write a query. You just, once you logically understand what you're trying to do, network events, search it, or destination port, all these things. So looking for mostly most common ports, and it is also set to last 7 days. I can run the query. Once I run the query, it gives me the results. Obviously, this is a demo tenant, so I might not see much. Let me see admin activities. If I see something, run the query. All right. So this is how basically, even if it doesn't give result, right? This is how you basically write the query. And you can even go how much of results you want. If you want to do up to 10, you want to go 1,000, whatever, max 10,000 also, you can go here. And in here itself, you are starting new, you want to see what it translates to KQL. You're going to click on here, edit in KQL, and then just give it a moment so that it can load. You see that entire UI part is converted as a query and loaded for you. Now you can, it's like an advanced edit, right? Now, the other thing, coming back to the new query, or if I even click on this and then, click on query and editor, this is what you're going to look at. So not this one, possibly the first one. Yes. So this is where, and as you see, I have typed in one table, right? Now, coming back to the one, right? If I'm searching something, let me, instead of last 30 days, think I will just take a moment. I would go for last 12 hours because to save or make it faster. And the moment I did that, it started running queries, right? Let me collapse this left navigation pieces so that the query window gets bigger. Now, if you look at this, has really loaded the raw volume of the data, and then you see it has a device ID, it has a timestamp, it has an action type, it has a remote IP, and then if I use my scroll bar here, and then there are like really good amount of initiating process SHA and things like that. So technically, if you look at, there is really a good volume of information just to help you understand, right? Let's say if we're doing this very fundamental, a hypothesis here, initiating process version info company name, maybe as a threat hunter, I think that this is not needed, right? This is totally not relevant information, at least for this hunting scenario. What you're trying to do, we're trying to do something around device network events. So as I talked about project, right? Project work in two different ways. When you have, let's say, 20 column, you want to take only 3 out of it or 4 out of it, you write project. But if you have 20 columns, you see only 3 which are not required, but rest of the 70s are required. What you can do is project away, and I'm going to do project away. And you see this editor is, right, really intuitive and intelligence. So it is only listing down the column names which are a part of device network events, right? So I would say initiating process, version, company name, and either I can hit shift enter from my keyboard or hit run query. So I'm gonna do some shortcut here and then run the query. Next time it loads, right? Again, you see, I'm not running really optimized query just to show that if you don't run, it's gonna take a while, right? Uh, you see that column, you will not be able to find that column anymore. That's gone. So that's how you do project, right? So, and then if I extend one row, right? Let me try to extend, and I can also make it a little bigger to save some space. So I'd say I'll not go here. What I would do is additional fields, right? So in additional fields, so I would say extend equal to parse JSON and additional fields, and then I'd say, yeah, that's how it is parsed, and you can extend it in a different way to particular columns and things like that, right? I'm just, for the interest of time, I'm not skipping it right now. And another thing to show you that you can also put comment on in the middle of queries. Now, that's one of the things you can do, and the same way you can use comment to make your query really meaningful and readable. Now, this is really a data dump, right? Like, this doesn't give you any value, or it is very difficult to make anything out of it. Now, if I want to give it a perspective here, what I'm going to do is summarize count by a remote port, for example. Okay, let me get remote port and run this. So once I run this, if you look at what it did, it gave me a summary of the hit count from each remote port. And if I, let's say, want to organize this a bit, this, sorry, description, okay, order by count descending, right? So now if you look at, this is how it's going to look like, right? Uh, coming to the fact that this gives me data, but this doesn't tell me, how I can, give me 1 second. This doesn't tell me anything visually. So I can either render it as a visual, or let me try to render as a column chart. Now, if you look at, right, obviously this is not a very optimized data to look for, but if you look at this gives me some sort of things here, or maybe if I change the chart, I'm just hitting a pie chart here. So you can really build a visual out of it. And okay, so I think it's going to take a while. Oh, I'll wait. Or maybe just to save some time, I will do refresh. Let it be refreshed for just in a moment. I'll exit the page. So, I mean, this is just to clarify, this is nothing to do with Defender. This possibly because I have not closed this browser really for a long time. So maybe my browser cache might have uh, overflown, but Defender does support this query, which I'm going to show you once again. So expanding the left navigation for ease of going there, go to hunting, advanced hunting, and Once it loads, another thing, right? So let's say what happened to me. That might also happen to me. Your browser crashes, your internet goes away, you're running a query. If you look at, right, this query history basically gives me everything. Pie chart, column chart, it says completed, and I can again go ahead and run that once again. So that's really a nice feature. If let's say you are on a Friday evening, just ran the query, and then on Monday, if you find out where exactly the query is, you come to query history, look at all the queries you run, you can really get everything you ran for a while, right? Now coming to this, I will change it to pie chart, run it again. I don't know why it doesn't like pie chart. Okay, so possibly yes. Oh, okay, let's try once. Last time, maybe we'll not do the visual. There is another way to do the visual as well if you don't even write a query. Hunting, advanced hunting, and I'll let the query load. And in the meantime, the query loads, right? Just to tell you, in the left navigation, there are three things. One is schema. Second one is in the schema, you're going to see, you know, you're going to see really all the tables wherein Defender collects the data, right? For example, this is entire alert. And if you have UEBA, you have UEBA info here. And this is AD sign-in logs and email logs for MDO, device events for your devices. And if you have TVM, you get all the TVM tables. If you have exposure management, you're going to see that. And just an add-on, if you're using XDR, or if you have converted this or configured XDR, unified experience, you can configure Sentinel, and you can write a single query which can correlate your Defender logs and Sentinel logs in the same place. So you don't need to technically copy or ingest all the Defender logs of Sentinel until unless you want them for a custom detection or a longer retention period, right? So coming back to the point here, let me rerun the query, and hopefully this should give me results. Okay, now there's another way, as I was talking about, let me collapse the left navigations and chart type. I'm going to say pie chart. Okay, there is possibly. Okay, let's see if it gives me, or if it crashes, then we understand that, yeah, it's not the right data set yet. All right, so that's a really nice input. Let me try to limit it. So again, I would just refresh and run it once again to see. So yeah, obviously, if this happens, as I think it is, there are multiple factors, maybe the internet, maybe the browser, but I would like to show it possibly, you know, with a lesser or smaller data set, which should work. But apart from that, the other things what you're going to see is also in this console is, as I shown you in the left navigation, right? That you can see, go to advanced hunting, go to advanced hunting. And let me come back to that just in a moment. But before that, I wanted to cover some other stuff on here. As I showed you in schema, right? You're going to see all the schema, table schema here. You want to see a schema, you expand that, you see how it looks like. Next section is functions. If you have any, there are built-in functions available. If you want to create one, you can create one function and then kind of save it. Then coming to the query, right? As you see, Defender by default gives you a lot of queries available. If you click one of them, you get to see the queries, and you can take one of these queries as your base template and then try to modify according to your need, right? So that's how you can basically do it. I'd say limit 10. And before I do this, let me go to a new query editor. And I really, you know, have a good question around how to call an external data. So let me see, I can show you some examples of that. Okay. And hopefully this should support it. And let me see here, go to that particular thing. All right, so I have a query written in my GitHub. So basically what it is doing is it is, you know, getting this GCP Google Cloud Platform's public IP addresses, right? This JSON is available publicly. All I'm trying to do is, you know, getting that with an external data command or external data keyword, and then because it's a JSON, I was able to map that JSON to particular property and the column name I want to, and then converting to that to some dynamic stuff, and then converting that to string, and then finally running it. So once I run it, we should see the results here in this. So that's how basically you can call external data as well without having to store them in your local machine. So imagine that you get a Tor IP list or any malicious bad hash IP list which you want to compare, or you want to join or do a search, issue a search within a Defender. You can do using this, you know, things. Uh, Coming to another question, I'd say anyone know a way to export a list of all tables and selectable column? Uh, okay, so I think what you need here is if you're searching something, right? You want to know which table they are in and only select the particular column. So instead of writing a single query, the way I would approach is, let's say I would say search and then search something like 1.2.3, something like that. And then if I obviously search it, it's gonna not give me any result. But to find out, I can say distinct dollar table, right? This query, let me paste that in the chat as well. This query will list, you know, yeah, exactly. I think this will give you the list of table, and if you do a star search, it's obviously going to give you the list of table and the columns, right? So that's pretty much it around how, as you see here, right? And then you can search the column inside a table and things like that. Now, the last piece I would say, let me see if this runs this time so that I can show you some visual. All right, so in the visual, let me get to area chart, as you see here, right? So technically, all I'm trying to do here is, or instead of limiting here, I would say limit it after the summarization so you can see some variation in the chart. And then go to area chart. Yeah, there we go. So that's basically gives you, let me see if I can get to some column. Yeah. So port number and then number of calls that port number has, right? So coming back to the same point, you start with the search, you project the right column. If you extend, you need to, and put a summarization to get a particular perspective of the data so that your hypothesis gets a perspective and gets aligned to a hypothesis. Then look at the results. If you really want to get a better picture, look at if you can apply a visual on that. Once you get a visual, then that really becomes easier for you to, you know, kind of look at and identify it's a true thing or a false thing, right? So with that said, I think I would say that's all about the demo. And this is the, I'll just open up for Q&A, and then also if you want to scan this link, this is where this takes us to the Microsoft documentation, wherein it can, and you know, things, you can get started with your study and things like that. And obviously, once again, thank you to the organizers, and thank you to all for being a wonderful attendee and having so many interesting questions. And at last about me, So I've written a book last year, which you can get in any platform. I've also have a course for KQL and Sentinel, which is technically free, where you can go to Udemy and take it for some KQL learning. These are my social links. On the right hand side, that's the scanner for my LinkedIn profile if you want to reach out to. And I also have been contributing to Microsoft Sentinel code repo itself for a while now. So with that said, I'll give it back to Dan or Wafa once again. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Samik. I think that Wafa has a